With Dragon Ball Daima refocusing its energy on the demon realm, I thought it would be no time like the present to go exploring that aspect of Toriyama's lore here on the Dragon Ball Cosmology Guide, where we look at the various cosmic aspects of Dragon Ball, such as angels, demons, gods, and everything in between. Now, the first character that we saw that was considered a demon was, of course, Piccolo Daimao, aka Demon King Piccolo. However, I already did a Dragon Ball in-depth on the history of Piccolo, and the first section goes into Demon King Piccolo, so that's not going to be discussed here. However, some of your favorites like Dabura and Mira and Toa and many others will be discussed on this series. So let's go ahead and start with the man who was considered the king of the demon realm, and that is Dabura, otherwise known in the Japanese version as Dabura or Doubler in some old subtitles, the king of the demons who was Babidi's right-hand man until Majin Buu turned him into lunch. But this character is deeper than you know. Let's explore him next. The Dragon Ball Daima news cycle has begun, and you can stay up to date by subscribing, enabling all notifications, and if you miss something, go to the playlist tab and click the Dragon Ball Daima news playlist and watch all the content so you can keep up with all the videos and streams covering all the news coming out of the newest Dragon Ball anime. Get ready because there's a lot of content incoming. Thank you for your support as always. Let's get back to the video. In my humble opinion, perhaps no other character in the history of all of Dragon Ball has personified the phrase wasted potential more than Dabura. Dabura to me was one of the coolest characters we've ever seen in Dragon Ball, and yet his time with us was so short. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. The programmers in Japan who work on things like Dragon Ball Heroes and Dragon Ball Online prior to Heroes have brought him back as one of the lead villains alongside Mira and Toa in various arcs involving the Demon Realm. But we'll talk about that probably in a future video. But I do want to promote a video I made a few years ago quickly to you, and that is Demon Realm Explained. And in this video, I went deep into what the demon realm actually is, why it is not the same thing as hell, how it fits in the Dragon Ball cosmology, and more, so make sure you check that out. Now, when it comes to Dabura, this, like I said in the intro, was Babidi's right-hand man. Babidi, of course, known as Madoshi Babidi, which translates to Warlock Babidi, is not himself a demon. He's a warlock who probably channels demonic energies and dark magic. However, Dabura is the king of the demon realm, or at least formerly the king, depending on who you ask. Back in the mid-90s, when Toriyama was first designing Dabura, there's no question that he took inspiration from not only the Western Christian perspective of what Satan looks like with the traditional red skin, the goatee, the pointy ears, you know, the kind of classic look of Satan, but also he may have been influenced by a very famous movie that came out in the early 90s right before the Majin Buu saga began publication, and that would be Aladdin, namely Jafar. Have you ever noticed how much Dabura looks like Jafar? Again, I could be wrong about this, it's just a connection that I made, but let's not forget that Toriyama has multiple times cited inspiration from Disney. Not only was 101 Dalmatians the movie that got Toriyama into even being an artist, Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo, three important characters in the Majin Buu saga where Dabura's from, is obviously a pun on the magic song from Cinderella, a classic Walt Disney Pictures animated film. To me, what made Dabura such a cool character from the very beginning is not just his design, but his overall demeanor. When he walks into a room, whenever we see him early on in Dragon Ball Z's Majin Buu saga, he commands respect in a weird way. You know, it's almost like he jumps out at the page because he's this tall, menacing guy. And let's not forget that the first thing that he does is not only kill the Supreme Kai's #1 dude, Kibito, with one blast, he also spits on Krillin and Piccolo and turns them into stone. That's one hell of a debut. So right off the hop, Toriyama's telling the viewer or the reader that this dude's not to be messed with, even though he may not be the most powerful and certainly wasn't the most powerful villain in the saga. He is still somebody who has dangerous techniques that will put you out of commission. Dabura manages to be both sophisticated as well as sadistic. He shows a lot of respect to Babidi and even commands respect from his enemies and shows them respect. But at the same time, he's also one of the characters that Babidi has somewhat under his control using his dark magic. He's a character that was already evil, was already not a good dude. With Babidi's dark magic upgrade, though, he became more powerful, and they really built him up for a while as being a threat. In fact, they even stated that he is relative to the power of Cell. Now, power scalers and Dragon Ball fans have debated for decades about what that actually means. Is Dabura as powerful as Perfect Cell or Super Perfect Cell? That's always been a point of contention among fans. To me, I think my theory is that he's probably right around Super Perfect Cell where he was at before Gohan took him out way back at the end of the Cell games, which makes Gohan a pretty appropriate foe for him to face off against. However, we would soon find out that unfortunately Gohan did not keep up with his training, and Vegeta and Goku both scoff at him for not taking it seriously, because the Gohan that we see fight Dabura, even though he is still stronger than a lot of people, let's not kid ourselves here, he wasn't the fierce assassin that we saw back in the Cell saga who took no shit from no one. You understand what I'm saying? That Gohan, not quite the same guy. He lost that bloodthirst that made him so dangerous, and Dabura takes advantage. Now, it is here that we really witness more of his awesome abilities. I have a series on the channel called the Dragon Ball Technique Guide. Dabura could fill out an entire playlist because not only does he have the spit that can turn you into stone, which was obviously influenced by Medusa and her eyesight turning you to stone. He also breathes fire, which is freaking awesome when you see it in the series. He's also got this really awesome saber that looks like it was pulled right out of Arabian Nights, hence my Jafar comparison at the beginning of this video. Besides just the sword, he can use his cape and do like a wind attack with it. He can materialize magic and magical artifacts, sort of like to seduce other people. He has telekinetic powers, and he can manifest a spear. That's right, before Gas manifested weapons in the Dragon Ball Super Granola arc, Dabura was whipping spears out of his asshole, and that's awesome! Also, another aspect of his personality is the fact that he oftentimes meditates. If you think Jiren spends hours and hours and hours in a deep state of concentration to channel his energy, buddy, Dabura did it first. And he does this to channel all of his internal dark ki, so that way when he's about to go into a fight, he has it all there at the forefront of his body, of his physical body. And of course, there's telekinesis and telepathy and the typical ki blasts and things that almost every Dragon Ball character has. Now, when it comes to comparing him to Cell, there have been debates about who would win the fight. Obviously, Cell has regeneration and he has the abilities of all the Z fighters and stuff like that. But Demon King Dabura has magical abilities that Cell does not know or understand. It was stated in multiple different sources, guidebooks, as well as in the anime and manga, that he is the strongest of the demon realm. But obviously Dragon Ball Heroes would expound on that and somewhat change it. But we'll get to that later on in this video. Dragon Ball Daima Episode 1 revealed something new about Dabura, and that is the fact that prior to him being the Demon King, his father, Abra, or Abura, take your pick, was the one in charge of the Demon Realm. We also are told about a mysterious object known as the Oculus Tertius. Now, as of the recording of this video, I don't have much information for you about this object, but if it becomes a major plot point in the series, I will be doing a video, a standalone video that is, focused on this mysterious artifact. So stay tuned for that. Now, let me take you back to the original video. I want to first discuss ultimately his fate. So he appears as being Babidi's #1 guy, his right-hand man, and he was basically hired or controlled by Babidi to help him find a place where they could channel enough energy to feed it to Majin Buu's containment unit to eventually release the Majin Buu demon back onto the earth so that Babidi could control it. Now, we'll talk about Majin Buu in the future in this series, so be patient on that. But it's Dabura that first detects that there are beings on Earth, mortals, that have extremely high levels of power. Some have theorized that this is something that came about from the battle with Cell, where we literally witnessed, mortals clashing that were solar system level, if not above. And prior to that, that was kind of a really huge feat. You could argue that the fights with Demon King Piccolo and Vegeta may have also triggered it, but because Cell was more recent, that makes a bit of sense. However, Cell was 7 years prior to the Majin Buu saga, and thus it makes you wonder, well, where were they at? Where were they at, really? And you have to also take into account that in the future timeline, Babidi and Dabura also appear, and there is no Gohan versus Cell fight. Instead, Trunks in the future timeline wipes out 17, 18, and Cell in Dragon Ball Z episode 194. So highly unlikely that it actually would have been Cell. That theory is more of a hypothetical, but it falls apart when you include the fact that Dragon Ball Super confirmed that Babidi and Dabura were in the timeline that Trunks is from. Ultimately, Dabura gets cast aside by Babidi once Majin Buu is unleashed upon the world, and Dabura realizes that his time with the clout that he had with Babidi is over, and that Buu is the new sheriff in town, and so he tries to take out Majin Buu by himself and ends up getting turned into a giant cookie and eaten, and that's the end of Dabura in the Dragon Ball manga and Dragon Ball Z anime. But like I mentioned, Dabura had a resurrection, a reincarnation story-wise and important-wise in Dragon Ball Heroes and Dragon Ball Online. He's really become an important force in some of those stories. But before I get to that, I want to cover one more kind of hilarious bit about the Dragon Ball Z anime. Remember, in the Dragon Ball Z anime, there's an extra scene that was not in the manga where King Yema, aka Lord Enma, puts Dabura in heaven because hell is too reminiscent of the demon realm, so he might be happy there. And as a result of that, Dabura becomes this like flower picking softie, and I always thought that was a fun little comedic bonus that was added for the anime that was not in the manga. And that's the last time we saw Dabura until we get to Heroes and Online and Xenoverse and that whole universe that I call the Dragon Ball video game universe, because they have their own stories. We find out in the Infinite History saga that his sister Toa, who's going to get her own video in this series, I'm sure of it. But anyways, she goes into an alternate timeline and releases the spirit of Dabura from the cookie before Majin Buu eats it. They end up going to the demon realm where he begins to secretly power himself up. He does this using a dark alteration of ki known as damage energy, and at one point Toa dies and he tries to get revenge for her. Within the video game universe, it's at this point that Dabura becomes so much more powerful than he was in Dragon Ball Z that he was strong enough to defeat Fat Buu. Like, that's how strong he got, that if they were to rematch Now, with this Dabura and the Fat Buu that we saw defeat him in Z, Fat Buu would be curtains. There's a lot of different variations on this version of Dabura, but I just understand that with each one, he uses different aspects of dark magic to increase his power, and he goes back to being not only a stronger villain, but in some arcs, the main villain of these individual stories. Now, speaking of other stories, I want to clarify a huge misconception when it comes to this character. People believe that he is in Sandland, the other Toriyama manga that just got a new movie released in 2023, and that is not Dabura. There's a character in Sandland known as Satan who was called Lucifer in the Viz English translation, and he acts as the father of the main character of Sandland, Beelzebub. But understand that this is not Dabura. Yes, he looks like him, no question about it, and Toriyama kind of rehashed this design, but Toriyama does that sometimes. Let's not forget that Master Roshi in Dragon Ball looks like God from Dr. Slump. So it's not a foreign concept for Toriyama to reuse designs or similarities, but they are not the same person. So I wanted to get that out of the way. Dabura's name is a pun, like many Toriyama names. Abuda Kabuda, aka Abracadabra, Dabura, Dabuda. That's where it makes sense. And it makes more sense in Japanese just because of the pronunciation of his name. It's not Dabura. You don't enunciate the boo, it's Dabuda. But it doesn't matter because you know who we're talking about. And that's pretty much everything you need to know about this character, and I will bring this video to a close. Take care, and I'll catch you in the next one where we go into the Demon Clan. Let's go.